Welcome everyone to the MCAT session. We're going to talk about acing the MCAT for students and alumni. And this is our 2016 session for folks applying in 2017. And all right, so the MCAT session is one that is often fraught with anxiety. The test, I know, is a very anxiety-filled day and process. I just remind everybody to keep your ultimate goal in mind as you're sitting there studying, and I know it's a lot of studying and it's a long process. Remind yourself of where you're headed and what your goal is. See yourself there in that white coat on your white coat ceremony day, smiling, happy. Remind yourself, okay, where am I going with this? Why am I doing this? I think it's important to start with a positive. And actually, as I'm starting with positives, I know a bunch of you guys were here on the initial kickoff meeting day. Some of you were hopefully on campus for the day. We had 3 students come in and speak. And I was just talking to some of those students, and they said it was okay for me to mention to you guys that all 3 of the students who came in to talk to you guys at the kickoff meeting on ground have been accepted to medical school. Yay. So just a reminder for you, this is a goal that is within your reach. It's something that's doable. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress, but there is an end that you can reach that is acceptance in medical school. So keep your eyes on the prize. We're going to do a little visual exercise. Dr. Begley put this in here. Close your eyes and picture the MCATs as a visual image. What do you see when you open them? I don't know if this is what you see, if this is what comes to mind. We want to work through this presentation on changing that visual image, the image that we want you to think about. You're standing here on top of a mountain, helping somebody up to the top. Your score on the MCAT, you're studying for the MCAT, your preparation for the MCAT is your first step in your professional journey. This is your first step in your responsibility to your patients. So this is your first part of studying for medical school. I know sometimes it feels like, oh my goodness, why am I doing this? All my friends are out, they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves. You're doing this because this is your goal and this is what you want to do. And in order to become a physician, in order to take care of your patients, in order to help your patients, you really need this knowledge. So remind yourself of that if you're out there studying and you're like, oh, I just don't want to do this. I'm feeling burnt out. I'm feeling tired. After you picture yourself in your white coat, also remind yourself, I want to do this because this is what I want to do in order to help my patients in the future. This is what I need to do. This is going to be the way of life that I am looking forward to, and I'm going to get this done, even if sometimes it's not what I would like to be doing on that given day. Why is preparing for the MCAT really important? Number one, because having a really good MCAT score helps you to get into your top choice school. It helps you keep your options open. So, with a higher score, you have the possibility of more acceptances, more interviews, more opportunities to visit different schools and to see, well, is this program a good fit for me? Is this program a good fit? So really figuring out what's going to be most important for you. I think something that people forget is that the higher your MCAT score, the more possibility that you'll get accepted earlier in the cycle. And right now, you may not realize how stressful the process is, but next year at this time, you will be cognizant of, oh my goodness, this is actually a pretty stressful process. It's very easy for a medical school to look at objective data, a GPA, and an MCAT score and say, okay, this applicant looks great, let's bring them in. A lot of the other criteria that you have, your co-op experience, your work experience, your research, your clinical, those things are going to be very attractive to the schools, but it takes a little bit more time to read through and process some of that information. And so people who have MCAT scores that are in the realm that they're like, okay, yeah, this is a nice MCAT score, they're going to be inviting those folks in for interviews, but they may get interviews slightly later because it's going to take a little bit longer to figure out who of the folks in this range of interviews or in this range of metrics do we want to bring in for an interview. So having a higher MCAT score just sets you up to be a little bit earlier in the application cycle. And then the final thing that is really important, again, to remind yourself is that an MCAT study and good MCAT preparation prepares you for the rigors of preclinical training. And that's something that I can't stress enough, is that this is not like the SAT where it's common knowledge. The material that's on the MCAT is the material that you need to be successful in medical school. So the more you study, the better you know this information, the better that you do on the exam, the easier it's going to be for you to start seamlessly right into your medical school education. So again, this is the first step of your medical training that you're doing right now. What classes should I take? Well, the following classes: Gen Chem, Organic, Physics, Intro to Bio, Genetics and molecular bio, we require that at Northeastern as a prerequisite to biochemistry. Psych and Soc, research and statistics, those are a good idea as well. It's not a bad idea to consider additional coursework in biology or behavioral sciences. You may have time for that. You may not. If you don't have time for additional coursework, know that you're going to be doing some studying. Particularly, a lot of people really only have time for one psychology and one sociology class, and that's fine, but don't underestimate those sections. You take those sections last when you're feeling tired. And so you really want to make sure that you're extra prepared for those sections. If you think about like the chemistry part of the MCAT, you have 2 semesters of general chemistry, 2 semesters of organic and biochemistry. That's 5 classes. You can't assume that one class in psych and one in soc is going to also cover the same amount of content and prepare you for the MCAT. You've got to realize that you're going to need to study material in addition to that. So how are you going to prepare for this? This is a lot of stuff. How are you going to actually set up your study plan? Well, to get started, I definitely recommend using the resources from AAMC. The Association of American Medical Colleges is the group that writes the exam, so they know what's on it, and they're always going to be your first resource. They're also a nonprofit, and so they're not making money off of you in any way. They're going to charge you for things, but that's to cover their program costs. So anything you can get from them is definitely going to be a really good resource. They have an official guide. They have other materials that I'll show you on future pages. You really want to organize your information. You're probably going to want to buy some study books from a test prep company, Kaplan or Princeton Exam Crackers. There are a lot of different companies out there. You may just want to sit down with some of those books and see, okay, what's going to be the best for me? Which one looks like it's going to be the most useful for me? Make some folders, gather your lecture notes, put everything together in a way that is really well organized for you, so that as you go through, you're going to be all organized and you're going to be able to really easily figure out, okay, what have I studied already? What do I still need to study? Spending that time organizing yourself at the beginning so you have a general sense of, okay, this is what I have to do, this is what I've already done, is really going to help you out as you move along. And taking the time to put together that organization is something that you're not going to regret later on. In general, we recommend starting out by studying content So you're going to study chemistry, you're going to do a full review of chemistry, a full review of biology. So go over the material, go over your notes from classes, go over the materials from the AMC, go over materials from a test prep book. There are other places that have resources. Khan Academy has some really good videos online. You can also look at some resources, and I'll show you some other resources from open classware that are online. Once you've gone over and done a thorough content review, then you're going to want to do some practice questions. Practice questions help you to figure out how do they ask questions on this test, because they're not straightforward questions. They're questions that are designed to test how you think, so they're not designed to be, for the most part, memorize and spit back. They really want to know, how do you analyze information? How do you utilize information? Because that's what's important for a physician to be able to do. So you're going to start doing practice questions and practice problems. That may trigger you to realize, oh, I need to go back and do some additional studying. I've heard some people say that they did a few practice questions in the beginning just so that they understood how the practice questions worked a little bit while they were studying content, because they felt it helped them a little bit in understanding how they should frame the content, and that's fine. But I would really recommend, for the most part, studying content, then practice questions, and then moving on to practice exams as a way to practice for the length of the exam and to really hone in on, okay, are there areas that I have missed, and are there things that I need to go back to in terms of content? You can put together a study plan, and I definitely recommend doing that. Again, that's something that I think will really help you out. You know, a study plan doesn't have to be set in stone, but when you look at the amount of content that you have to learn for the MCAT, I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed. But if you give yourself an adequate amount of time, 4 to 6 months to study, if you give yourself 10 to 20 hours a week, one day on the weekend for a practice test as you're getting closer to taking the test, a couple hours a day and a longer chunk of time on the weekend, or maybe an hour in the morning and a couple hours in the evening every day. That's a lot of time. And if you start organizing yourself and taking that content and really planning it out, suddenly things seem a lot more doable, and it seems a lot more reasonable to imagine yourself really grasping all of the content and really having the time that you need to do. And for that reason, putting together a study schedule is, I think, really useful. Give yourself some flex time. I mean, obviously things come up. Maybe one day something's a little more complicated. Maybe something comes up that, in your social life that you're like, oh, I just really want to do this. So, you have to have a little bit of flex time in there. I've read study from all 4 sections on most days. I think other people feel like it's better to just focus on one section. What I do recommend is practicing CARS every day, even if it's just one passage a day or 2 passages a day, and having CARS days. The CARS section is definitely the section that can be the hardest to bring up. There are strategies and techniques that you can use for CARS, but some of it is just reading speed and ability. And so the more that you are reading dense and complex material, the better it is for you. And so doing that every day is going to help you out. And then joining a study group can be really helpful. Having peers kind of keep you honest is useful. If you have peers who are also studying, it also can help you to have people to empathize with. If you have peers who kind of get anxious and studying, working with them is going to make you more worried, they might not be the people who you want in your study group. So you want the people who are going to be helping you improve your score, not helping you get more and more nervous about the test or feel like, oh my goodness, this isn't going to work out. Or the people who you're going to spend your study group time chatting with as opposed to studying. In terms of resources for the test, I would recommend starting with the low-cost ones. Applying to medical school and medical school itself is a very expensive process, so you might as well start with the low-cost resources. Also, AAMC does put out the low-cost resources, and again, since they write the tests, you want to use their resources. I will send you these slides, so you'll have the URLs here. Again, Khan Academy has these videos that they've put together. They've been working with AAMC on this. I know I've been doing surveys of students who have taken the test and done really well on it and how they studied. And a number of students said that they watched pretty much all of the Khan Academy videos. There are a lot of them. So that's a lot of time. That's one of those things, let's say you're on co-op and you're commuting on the train. You can spend your train time potentially watching Khan Academy videos. That would be a good use of your time. There are also MOOCs. Those are open classrooms like Coursera and edX for when you really need content. So for example, you can go on there and find just an online biology class that's free. And you can just do the units in that online biology class that you're like, wait, I feel like maybe I didn't get this content or we didn't cover this in the class that I took. So you can look through those online classes and just find a lecture on the material that you maybe are missing. Test prep classes. So according to AAMC data, about 50% of matriculated students take a test prep class, which of course means that about 50% don't. It's not necessary to take a test prep class. Classes provide structure, they provide pacing, accountability, they provide you with test taking strategies, they provide you with ideas for how to structure your time during the test. They give you a lot of materials, which you could also just buy the materials separately. So the test prep companies are good for that. A test prep class is not enough on their own. So you do still need to study on your own. Most people are going to take practice tests and they're going to buy those practice tests from the test prep companies. AAMC has practice tests, but they only have 2 of them. So you're going to take those practice tests close to when you are thinking you're ready to take your test. So you're going to use those as a final judge to say, okay, is it time to take the test? The test company classes tend to be a lot harder and graded a lot harder than the classes through AAMC. I had a group of people who came actually to the on-ground presentation about MCAT. So there were 3 of them, and they all said that they were doing 10 points worse on the practice test from the test companies than they did on the test day. They had all done really well on their tests. I think part of that is the test prep companies want you to take a practice test, see your score, freak out over it, and then sign up for a test prep class. So they do sort of peddle that anxiety to people. They are a good tool for doing some practice, seeing, okay, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? The things you got wrong, you really want to go back and study some more and understand, why did I get this wrong? Was it just a careless mistake, or do I not know the material? And if you don't know the material, then obviously you want to go back and really make sure that you learn the material that you're missing. So, you know, again, they're $2,500 or so for a test prep class. Some people feel like they're worth it. Some people feel like, I just really don't feel like I need it. It's a very personal decision on your part, and certainly not something that you have to take. When should I sit for the MCAT? Very important, sit when you're ready to achieve your best score. So if you're studying and you're thinking, you know what, I'm not completely ready, even if you're signed up for it, you're better off moving your test or taking the test and voiding it than taking the test and not getting the score that you want, Because if you do take the test and you get a score that you don't want, number one, that score never goes away. You have to send it in. It's not like you cannot send in a score. And guess what? You're going to wind up taking it again. So that's not a fun experience either. Some of the medical schools will actually average together your test scores if you have more than one score. So if you have a bad score and then you retake it and you get a good score, that bad score does not go away. So really it's in your best interest to make sure you're as ready as possible when you take it. Now that said, if it's an anxiety-ridden day, some people take the test and they just don't do as well as they hoped. It's not the end of the world. If you take the test and you don't do as well as you want and you have to take it again, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it happens. Admissions committees are made up of people. They understand how stressful the test day is. Many of them once took the test themselves. They remember. So, if you don't do as well as you hoped, you can definitely take it again. I would say, come in and talk to me about your plan for retaking it though. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides. Registration has already begun for January through June. I definitely recommend signing up for it already if you haven't, like figuring out when you feel like you would rather take it. I know a couple of the girls who were at the session on Monday said they took it at the location by, I think they said South Station, and they felt that that was a really good site. So all of the sites are a little bit different. That one they definitely recommended. So, if you haven't signed up, you might want to look at the list of centers and see if that one has a space available. It takes a month to get your scores back. So if you test in January, March, or April, you'll have your score before the applications open or are submitted in June. If you take the May test, you'll have your scores before the school gets your application, because the schools don't get the applications until the end of June. If you're testing in May, talk to me about what, the process for applying. If you take the test in June, you can still apply with a committee letter. Again, talk to me about that and see, what's going to be the best strategy. In terms of registration, it's a double-edged sword in some ways. You want to register early because you want to get a seat on the date that you want in the location that you want. Boston is obviously a college town, and so some of the seats do fill up and some of the dates fill up. You don't want to have to travel to, I don't know, Toronto to take the test. On the other hand, if you're registered and you realize, you know what, I'm not ready to take it, I'm going to want another month to study for it, you're better off moving the test. There is a fee to move your test date, and of course, there's some chance that you're not going to find a seat. If you are moving your test date, you're not going to be the only one moving your test date. There will be other people who are rescheduling. So seats do open up, and it's a process of, double checking, looking for another test date, looking for another site, seeing what's available. So if you are feeling like, I don't know, better off moving, but try and sign up for when you think you're going to be ready to start. And just a quick note, make sure when you register your name is exactly as it appears on the government ID that you'll bring when you go to take the test. You'll either bring a driver's license or a passport, or a state photo ID when you go to take the test. Particularly for our students who are from Puerto Rico, who may have two last names, double check what your ID says and put it on there exactly as it is on the ID. Because if your ID has two last names and you only put one last name on there, that's going to be a problem. They're not going to let you take the test. Test limits. AAMC policies, you can take the MCAT up to 3 times in a year, or up to 4 times over 2 test years, and up to 7 times in a lifetime. I got to say, any of those would be a really bad idea. Pre-health programs policies, you can take the MCAT once in a calendar year to qualify for a committee letter. Now, if there's some exceptional reason, we'll talk to you about exceptions to that policy. You know, if you take the MCAT and I don't know, something happened, you were sick on the day of the test, but you just weren't thinking clearly and you took it anyway and you got a bad score because you weren't feeling well. Maybe you threw up on the day of the test and you just were like, oh, I'm going to do this anyway, though. I'm so ready for it. Um, Come in and talk to us. We're not trying to be unreasonable. What we're trying to do is prevent you from making a mistake. So, like I said, um, you know, if you don't do well on the test once, it's not the end of the world. What we don't want you to do, though, is not do well on the test and then turn around, take it again a month later, and not do well again, because that's going to make the school a lot more concerned. That's something that, you know, if you do poorly on it twice and then you get a good score the third time, the schools are going to wonder, okay, which student is going to show up at medical school in the fall? And they've got two tests that say maybe not the strong student and only one that says the strong student. So you want them to see, okay, maybe they had one test that didn't go well, but then they took the time, they realized, oh, that wasn't so good. They took the time, they prepared, and they did better on it the next time. So typically, if you didn't do well on the test, it's because you don't know the material well enough, which means that you need to spend a good amount of time, 4 to 6 months, studying. There are exceptions to that. Again, talk to us. Preparing for the test day, if at all possible, I would strongly recommend doing a test run to the test center. Um, what the girls were saying on Monday was the test starts at 8. They said they got a text the day before that said get there at 7. So in your head, kind of mentally think, well, I may need to get there at 7. Um, do a test run in the morning to see how long it's going to get you to the test center, if at all possible. If you're driving, check out the parking situation, see where you would park. If you're taking the T, see what the public transportation is like. If you aren't driving, you may want to consider like Ubering there at least and taking the T home just to make sure that you're there on time. Allow extra time to get there. Don't assume, particularly because the test is a morning test and it could be rush hour, there could be a lot of traffic. Don't assume that everything will go flawlessly. Allow extra time to get there. The night before, go to bed at a reasonable time, get a good night's sleep if at all possible. A few of the girls were saying that the day before the test they didn't study at all. Somebody was saying, you know, some yoga studios, for example, if you're new to the studio, they'll give you like a week membership for $30. And one of the girls was saying that she did that. So she did yoga every day for the week before. Um, so think about ways that you can kind of manage your stress as you're going into the session and, um, you know, how you're going to be calm on the day of the test. Eat breakfast. You don't want to go into it on an empty stomach. Remember your government ID. I would recommend, just in case, bring a second ID. Each of the test centers is going to have a different setup, so you may want to call and see how much space you'll have in a locker to store your stuff, see how much you can bring with you. I would actually recommend, in terms of sleep and breakfast, on your test days, you do your test days exactly the same as the actual day. So get up at the same time, have the same breakfast, the same snacks, the same lunch. Take all of the breaks during your practice test, do exactly the same. And a couple of the girls who spoke said that they are not morning people. And so for the month before they took the test, they got up really early just so their body was used to getting up, so that on the day of the test, it was just another day. It wasn't like, oh, they're used to getting up at 9, but for this one day they got up at 6. So for the last month, they'd been getting up at 6, so they were ready on the actual day of the test. How to prepare mentally for the test day. We talked about some of this. Again, when you're taking practice tests, unless you have no other choice, it's better not to take it in a familiar, comfortable environment. You're going to be in a different environment on the test day. One of the girls who was talking said that she did her practice tests on the third floor in the library in one of those carrels there, and she used earplugs, and that was fairly similar to the actual test day. Some of the centers apparently have noise canceling headphones. That's what they had at the South Station Test Center, and those were really useful. You really can't hear anything when you have those on. Remember, you're not going to achieve a perfect score. You guys may be used to getting perfect scores on tests and classes, and so it's really important when you go in, if you have a question that you don't know, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It doesn't mean you're not going to do well on the test. It just means, okay, I got to skip this. I'm going to come back to it. So you really want to be prepared for that contingency, and prepared for if it doesn't, the first question isn't a good one. I'm going to skip it, going to come back to it. It's not the end of the world. Have a little mantra that you say to yourself, or a little something that kind of helps you calm down, because you can get questions wrong and do just fine on this test. And remember, you always have the option to cancel or void the test if you aren't feeling good about your performance. Now, people tend to be notoriously bad judges of how they did on the test, but if you didn't get to 2 sections on the cars, you know that that was not a good test for you, and you're better off voiding the test rather than having that scored. If you know that a couple of the sections in the physics, you've never seen the physics before, well, this was not good. So it is better to void than to get a bad score. If you did all the questions and you were unsure about some of them, that's a little bit different story. If you feel like you did everything that you could do to prepare, um, again, like I said, people are notoriously bad judges. So I wouldn't just void because you're a little bit freaked out, because the test is hard, because the test is going to be hard the next time you take it too. And then if you weren't feeling well on the day of the test, and sometimes people really just don't feel well on the test day, just because their resistance and their immunity is down, it's not uncommon. What happens if I don't achieve the score I want? Can I retest? Yes, you can. But again, we're pretty strict about committee letters with that. We recommend deferring your application and really spending the time to study again. It's really unlikely that you'll do better if you turn around and retake the test. 1 poor score is not going to keep you out of medical school, but 2 poor scores are a much bigger concern. And what you don't want to do is get into a position where you're like, oh, now I have 2 scores that I'm not happy with. Now I've got a lot of pressure on me for the next test, and it's going to be a bigger concern when I'm applying. So that is the bulk of my presentation. I don't know if anybody has questions about anything. I'm going to turn off the recording, so thank you for people watching at home. If you have questions and you're watching at home, please feel free to send me an email.